Welcome to another episode of the Balance Hormones Empowered Women podcast. I'm your host, Abby Vallejo, registered dietitian, certified personal trainer, and health coach. And what I do is I teach women of all ages how to align their diet, their lifestyle, and their exercise with their hormones in order to unlock their most vibrant health in a feminine based approach that is working smarter, not harder. So today I'm so excited to have the lovely Courtney Cowie, a dear friend and fellow practitioner. Courtney does nutrition therapy and she's a functional diagnostic practitioner. And her realm of genius is gut health. And I know that is such a big topic these days. So I was so excited to have her on so we can dive into all things gut health. And Courtney also has, as many practitioners do, her own personal journey of healing and story to share. So, Courtney, I would love if we could just dive right into some of your backstory. Like, what is your healing journey? And then, kind of, how did that turn into you becoming a practitioner?
Oh gosh. Well, I'll try to give you the Cliff Notes version, Abby, because I'm sure we've talked about a lot of this in the past, but it is a story. So I always say when I tell my story that it really goes back to childhood for me. Like, I mean, I was the kid who had chronic stomach aches all the time. And I mean, as far back as I remember, I think they were happening already by like third, fourth grade. And I would say I was probably having at least one a week. Maybe they were more frequent, but like it was a regular thing for me to walk because I would walk to and from school. Not too many
Mhm.
kids do that anymore, but it was like a
Right.
mile walk. And so like I'd get them towards the end of the day and then I'd walk home and the first thing I would want to do is like lay on the couch in the living room with like a pillow under my stomach. And that like pressure on my belly for like 20 minutes would
Mhm.
really, really help. Like often it would go away and then I would just get up and it would be totally fine. The strange thing was like I didn't have a bowel movement. It just for whatever reason needed to just lay down with that pressure.
Mhm.
And so I think in a sense like it just was kind of normalized as something specific to me. Like my parents never really worried exorbitantly about it. But I will tell you, like, as I got older, I was having these like regular stomach aches coming home from school, putting pressure on my belly that would take care of it. The other thing, though, that's kind of interesting, just thinking back, was as a kid, I got into like swim team at, age 11, 12, something like that. And I remember like for the YMCA swim meets, we would drive to different locations around the area where I grew up. And we'd be in like these school gyms or these like YMCA facilities in the gym, and I would just be like doubled over in pain. And I can remember a few times where I'd get up to, they'd line up the people going out for their, swim heat in a line of kids. And so I'd walk out there like, oh my God, my stomach hurts, my stomach hurts. And then I'd step up to the block and they'd be like, okay, swimmers, take your marks. And like instantly the pain would kind of go away, or I don't know what would happen. Just this is how I remember it.
Mhm.
And I'd dive in and start my race, and then I'd get out and it was like gone. And it could have been like an adrenaline thing that just sort of like tamped
Mhm.
it right down. But it was weird that way. And my dad coached my soccer team for a year or two too as a kid. And he was like, yeah, there were times where you would like tell me your stomach hurt and I'd have to put you on the bench and like, give you a rest. So that was kind of like the classic thing that happened to me from like fairly early childhood all the way through like high school years. And then when I got to college, so there's a bit of a hormone component to my story, which I often don't share. So this will be kind of cool to like share this with your audience, Abby. But I went to UW Madison as a kid, doing swim team soccer. I really enjoyed competition and just like working hard, driving myself to be the best I could, right? Like I've got that achiever type personality. So I worked really hard at that. And when I went to Madison, I knew I wasn't going to be able to make like the swim team because they're really, really good. So they actually did a lot of like mass recruiting of women with like sports backgrounds for their crew team, so the rowing team. And so I was approached by one of the women rowers and she's like, "Would you be a coxswain for our team?" And I'm like, "A coxswain? Isn't that the person that sits in the front of the boat and like
Oh,
directs or coaches?"
nice.
And I was like, I don't think I wanted to sit there though."
Yeah.
I'm having this conversation
Yeah.
internally like, "No, I need to actually do the work." And so I said
Yeah.
to her, I'm like, "No, I want to like try, I'll try, but I want to do like the actual team." And at
Yeah.
that time, they had just set up this like lightweight crew team. And so a lightweight crew is you have to meet a weigh-in of 130 pounds or less. So smaller
Okay.
size women, right?
Yeah.
That being said, though, as you can imagine, Abby, like there were women who were quite tall trying to make that weight. And it's like a lot of sports where you can leverage, your arm and leg length, like the longer you are in rowing,
Mhm.
the more
Mhm.
power you can technically leverage. So anyhow, but what ended up happening was I got on the team. I stayed the course. The first year, a lot of people dropped off because the training is fairly hard and then it gets more competitive. And then the second year I did crew at Madison was like when I made the varsity team. And so at that level, the team's quite small because you've got a racing 8 and then you've got a racing 4 and then you've got a few spares. And so where I was sort of falling on the ranking of women was like I was just fast enough to make the racing 4. And so
Mhm.
me and this other girl were kind of like seat racing, and sometimes she would beat me, sometimes I would beat her. But I think just the mindset of being on a team like that with other women who there was this weight, weigh in component, kind of like wrestling, like it sets up this psychology of like restriction and needing to like, work really hard to meet this like specific number to
Mhm.
qualify, right? And of course, all these women are very different body shapes. Some of them more muscular, some of them thinner, some of them are like upwards of 5'8", others are shorter, like 5'4", 5'3", right? So like it was interesting. And just being in that group of women, you saw all kinds of really disordered eating behaviors, like binging after the weigh-in, fasting or like under eating leading all the way up to like the weigh-in and everything in between. And then of course, like the mood dysregulation that comes with that, because I'm sure you've spoken on this before, when you start to really screw with, caloric intake and especially when you're super duper active like that, for women, it's just very, very hard on our emotional, psychological, well-being, right?
Yeah.
And so I can't say that that was the like sort of deciding factor, but I don't think being in that environment helped. But during that time, I started to develop over exercising, under eating disorder, which is interesting because I'm not a very tall person. So I've never even had an issue weighing in at 130 pounds. But I think,
Mm.
again, just being in that group mentality, it sort of set that same bar for me too.
Oh, yeah, it'd be
And
so hard not to, being surrounded by all these women who are, and I'm sure a lot of them being like taller, working really hard to weigh in at 130. That's, oh, I can't even imagine. That's
For
rough.
sure. Oh, for sure. Because even like open weight rowers traditionally are like taller, just very muscular, strong people, right? Men and women. And so some of these women, height wise, could have been potentially open weight, but they were just lighter, thinner frames. So they were trying to do it at the lightweight level, which of course, if they made the weight, they could, right? So,
Mhm.
but yeah, I mean, it was a lot of just intense training, probably the most intense athletic endeavor I've ever done in my life. Like I didn't think rowing was going to be that hard, but it
Rowing
turned out
is
to be.
hard. Oh my goodness, rowing is such a sport. How many days a week were you practicing? Do you remember?
Yeah, so it was, I believe it was every single weekday, and I'm pretty sure most Saturdays we had to train too. And then of course there were like doubles. So a lot of times we were getting up in the morning and doing a
Mhm.
workout, and then
Yeah.
always the afternoon workout was mandatory. But a lot of these women too, I guess now that you asked that, Abby, because of the whole weight obsession and weight control component, the ones that were very close to 130 pounds, they would go and do extra workouts on their own just to like burn calories to try to
Mhm.
keep their weight. And so it was quite like obsessive, if you will. Like it was
Yeah.
very imbalanced, like looking
Yeah.
back on it all. So yeah, so it was very intense training. I mean, it was an amazing experience. I got to like travel and compete and get this amazing achievement being on the team, but like at the end of the day there were major consequences. And so some of the things that happened to me during that time, I completely dropped my cycle. I also lost weight. Like, I probably was, I would say arguably I was underweight. And it people who saw me day to day, I don't know that they registered it quite as like profoundly, but I know that given it was the college years, I would go back home every so often for like holidays or the
Mhm.
summer. And I was a swimmer, right, all my life growing up. And so I would go to the community pool near my parents' house and like swim when I was home. And I remember some of the regular like older ladies that would come in and they'd like lap swim every day. Like one of them, her name was Esther, came up to me in the shower, was like, "Oh my gosh, Courtney, like you've lost so much weight." But then she's like, "But you look really good," but it still wasn't natural, Abby. Like I
Yeah.
only looked good because I
Mhm.
was doing a hell of a lot of strength training and just
Yeah.
intense. Like I
Yeah.
looked like, probably a marathon runner looked
Yeah.
like,
And I just
somebody.
want to put a little ping here is that We like in our society, I'm just thinking of this other podcast I was listening to where they were talking about getting shredded and how we so often aspire like to be shredded and to have like really, really low body fat. And, if we're looking at, let's say, bodybuilders in a competition, like women in a figure competition, or, like you were saying, even rowing where you have to make a weight class, or I'm thinking of, like MMA fighting, they have to weigh in at a certain class.
Yeah.
That is not ideal for our health and longevity. Like I think we tend to think like, "Oh my gosh, they're so shredded, they have really low body fat, like that's ideal for health." No, like it is not ideal for health. That is too far extreme, and the people that do that for a long time and take that very, very extreme, they're actually jeopardizing their long-term health, right? Their longevity, their
Yep.
hormones. I mean, women, so I mean, I guess there's quite a range of body fat that women should have, but once we get under a certain amount, and that could, depending on the woman and her genetics, maybe under 15%. And I don't know what you would say. I usually say probably under 15 or lower is probably getting too low. Now, there are a
Mhm.
few exceptions there, kind of depending on genetics and whatnot, but I know like I sit quite well right around like 17, 18%, and I'm a pretty
Mhm.
slender person. So, and then going up to, mid or even high 20s being a more normal, regular amount of women, need that amount of body fat for us to have healthy hormones, right? And so I think that these sports and, I mean, being fit is so good, but I think we often put certain people up on a pedestal that have pushed themselves so far. I mean, if you talk to the high level female athletes out there, how many of them are not getting a period? How many
Oh,
of them are maybe depressed or anxious or having mood issues because they're not eating enough? Their body's in a state of near starvation,
yeah.
so they're basically driving their health off of a cliff to reach these really difficult to attain parameters.
Right.
And what is that doing to their long-term health? So I just wanted to like kind of ping that in because, we're taught like this is the ultimate thing you can achieve. And if you do it, you'll be perfect. But when you get there, you certainly don't feel perfect, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no, 100% Abby. And I think just along with that, just the level of training. I mean, even Olympic athletes, I mean, I would argue their lifespan is likely shortened compared to the average person because that's just not natural to put the body under that kind of like exercise-based oxidative stress. I mean, that's a huge
Mhm.
load for a
Yeah.
person to try to rest, sleep, and eat out
Yeah.
of, right? Like I
Yeah,
don't care how.
that's what I was asking, like, how many days and how often did you practice? It sounds like it was at least 6 days a week and sometimes multiple times per day.
Yeah.
That's so intense because,
Oh,
we
yeah.
tend to think more is better. If I could just work out 6 days a week, then I'd be doing it. But no, often that's too much because there's what's ideal for your body and then
Right.
there's what you can tolerate, right? And when you're young
Right.
and you're healthy, you can tolerate more, so you can put your body through more, but ultimately it ends up being a cost, right?
Oh, for sure. And I mean, the building blocks were already starting to get laid in high school. I mean, as a swim team kid, like I would take gym or swimming for gym, and I'd be
Mhm.
in the pool like halfway through the day. I'd wake up in the morning and go to the pool. I'd go to practice after school. So like, yeah, I think there was really this like imbalance at a deep level for a good decade of my life where, a lot of where my own self-worth and feelings of adequacy were coming from these setting these very high goals in sports particularly and trying to achieve them and then telling
Mhm.
myself like the average person wouldn't be able to do this, like look at
Yeah.
what you're doing, and it
Yeah.
didn't matter if I was like performing better than the average person. It was just more the effort of like setting the plan. It was really intense and then sticking to it. I got a lot of like positive feedback internally from doing that, but it came at a cost, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so I lost my cycle. That was one of the main things. And then you and I kind of talked a bit on the episode that I'm going to be airing on my podcast just about our birth control pill stories. And so this is
Yeah.
this is where mine comes in, Abby. So again, not knowing any better, this was well before I knew about like nutrition and holistic, forms of like medicine, right? Like just regular conventional docs was all I had really been exposed to at that point in time. So either on my own accord or maybe my mom like scheduled me an appointment with a doctor. And of course, like go in there, explain like what's going on. And they're like, well, you need to go on the birth control pill. You're not getting a period because that's the number one go to for women that aren't having a cycle, which is kind of silly because like, it's inducing a cycle
Yeah.
artificially, but it's not
Like
really,
it's
it's
not
a,
what your body wants to do. It's not fixing
no,
why you weren't having a cycle, but it's like forcing your body to look like it's normal.
exactly. So I did that probably for maybe 3 or 4 years. It wasn't a super duper long time, but I got eventually graduated from Madison. And then when I was living out in Arizona for my first job, sometime in there, I just decided to myself, like, I don't want to be on this anymore. There's really no reason. I don't want it, I'm not using it for reproductive, protection purposes. Like, I just don't want to be on this pill. So I went off of it. But the scary thing was, like, my cycle didn't come back. And so, at that time I was a little bit older and I'm like, well, I'm definitely not going to go back on it to have a cycle, but everything else seems okay. So I'm just going
Mhm.
to like carry on my merry way and,
Yeah.
deal with this problem later.
Yeah, and I
Um,
think and I think so many women see that even as a positive thing because I remember even myself back in the day when I'd have, other friends or female colleagues or something that would say, I remember I had one and she's like, "Oh yeah, I just don't ever get a period. Like I went off the pill and it just never came back and it had been, I don't know, it'd been a few years." And I'm like, at me at the time, right? I was like, "Oh, you're so lucky. You don't get a cycle. You don't have to deal with that." I think us, when we're young and, the period is a burden and we're not understanding what a good vital sign that is for our body, right? We're not taught any of those things, which is why I'm so
yeah.
passionate about teaching them. We think, oh, it's nice. I just don't have to deal with this inconvenience of bleeding every month, not realizing that that is a sign that something detrimental is going on with our health.
Oh, absolutely. And that was probably what my thought process was like, great, I'm doing like triathlons now. Now
Yeah.
I don't have to
Yeah.
worry about this
Yeah.
annoying factor, like
Yes.
getting in
Yes.
the way of competitions or whatever. So yeah, absolutely. But what is interesting is around that same time frame, that's like sometimes people ask the questions. I know I'll ask this to my clients on occasion, like, when was the last time you really felt well? Right. And for some people, it's like years and years and years ago. So when I think back on like, when was it that I really start to remember having like issues with fatigue? Like the cycle dropping was one thing. Besides that symptom and the stomach aches as a kid, like I don't really remember anything else jumping out at me in terms of just like symptoms or chronic health things, right? But around that time I was in Arizona and I went off the pill and I was trying to train for some triathlons because that was another interest of mine at the time. I remember like just really feeling tired a lot and it kind of crept up on me. And it was so bad actually, Abby, that I had registered for this like I think it was supposed to be like a half Ironman, maybe it was an Olympic distance, one or the two, triathlon in Flagstaff, which I was living in at the time. And I had to contact the committee and ask them to downgrade me to like the shorter one because I was like, I don't think I have the energy to do this. Like,
Yeah.
I'm seriously worried I'm going to
Yeah.
crash if I try to
Yeah.
do this. So,
Yeah.
of course, they were good with it. And I did the shorter one and it was fine. But that stuck out in my brain as like, wow, like, what's going on? And again, it wasn't scary enough that I'm like, I need to go to the doctor and figure this
Yeah.
out. But that's the
Yeah.
first time I started to remember my energy really being an issue. So then,
Would you say you were still kind of restricting your eating at that time?
no, that had pretty much normalized. I think, like thinking back, I so the rowing years were the first 2 years I was at Madison, and then my 3rd year I got out of crew because it was really intense, and I was like, I don't think I wanna put my body through that a 3rd time, and it was just
Yeah.
so hard to, like,
Yeah.
make that 4 boat, and I was just like, I think I'm gonna do triathlon. So then my 3rd year at Madison, I joined the triathlon club and shifted to that. And then my 4th year, I went overseas and studied in Japan. So when I was over there, like I still exercise, but the eating, restricted eating, that all kind of went out the window because it was such a novel, exciting experience. And of course,
Mhm.
like sampling different foods and being part of the whole food and eating culture. I mean, that's huge in Japan. So I think something kind of like flipped back to a
Yeah.
little bit more of a normal. But my cycle never came back during any of these times. Um, so by the time I had landed in Arizona and I was like working and out of college, yeah, it was the fatigue that was starting to come on. And then I ended up from there applying to graduate school and then moving to Seattle, Washington for graduate school. And again, I was doing like some swimming just on my off time. I don't remember anything super, extraordinary coming on during that time frame. And then I did go back over to Japan I think it was my second year in graduate school for a full year. And that's when like things really started to break down big time with my gut, like beyond just the chronic stomach aches I was having. And I can't pinpoint it to a specific event, Abby. Like it again probably was a slow creep on some level. But I remember I was living in this house that was like a room share with some other international people that were just living and working in Japan. And then some of the folks in the house were just Japanese people that wanted a really affordable living option. So it was cool. They were a cool group of people. But, I had my routine where I'd get up and I'd like go for a jog. And then I was, an exchange student as a graduate student over there. So I had access to like, the gym and stuff. And I just remember like being out in the streets of Tokyo and like having these like, my like gut starting to cramp up and being like, oh
Oh,
shit, I need to
no.
use the bathroom. Like, and I
Right
mean,
now. Yeah.
right now, like
Yeah.
right now, especially
Yeah.
because you're running, right? And I'm like, oh God, like,
Oh,
do they and most of the parks have like, bathroom facilities. Generally speaking, I was never in such a situation that it was like a major problem, but I would start to map out routes where I knew like, okay, if I'm going to have an issue, there's kind of a
yeah.
bathroom somewhat nearby.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it just got progressively worse. And I just remember thinking like, okay, like this really sucks. Like why, and I just remember kind of starting to have more anxiety around like, okay, can I go for this run? Should I just maybe skip it today? And at the time, I was friends with like this Japanese woman I had met from my undergraduate year abroad that I had done over there. I probably forgot to mention that, but I went over initially when I was at Madison as an exchange student. So
Mhm.
met Japanese friends when I was over there. So she was a really good friend that I stayed in contact with. And so when I went back as a graduate student, her and I reconnected and she's like, she helped get me a job at this like Spanish tapas restaurant, which was a really interesting experience. And this kind of ties into the hormone part now that we're talking about this. So the job itself was like a third shift job because, of course, it's like center of Tokyo. It's a late night crowd. They
Yeah.
serve like wine and beer and alcohol. And of course, it's like Spanish food, fine. But like she needed the help when the clientele was like the busiest, which was like the 10 to like 10 p.m. to like 2 a.m.
Yeah.
slot.
Yeah.
And of course, and she didn't, it was really hard as an American to get hired anywhere in Japan outside of teaching English because I just found they're a lot more particular about your language skills. And I mean, my
Mm.
Japanese was really, really good, but I mean, compared to our tolerance for like
Yeah.
like word mess ups in the United
Yeah.
States, like
Yeah.
they're much more particular. So like,
Yeah.
but this woman was like, "Oh no, I like employing foreigners. Like you can have the job. It's all good." And so I was like,
Mm.
"Great, I can practice my Japanese and this will be
Yeah.
awesome." So anyhow, I'm doing this job, Abby, and I'm starting to notice after a few weeks, like, man, I feel really off because I could make it work with my school schedule because my first class for the day was like 2 p.m. or something. So
Okay.
I'd start to get up like early afternoon. And I remember just like after a while standing in my bedroom thinking, like, wow, I feel so lightheaded, like something's really off. And after a few weeks of this, I stood up one morning and I actually like passed out in my
Oh,
room and I
no.
didn't realize it until I like woke up and I had chipped my tooth and I was like,
Oh, no.
oh my God, this is like something's not right. And I got really worried. And that was kind of I think the event that had to like trip me to be like,
Mhm.
okay, I maybe need to go see somebody. But I really had an appreciation for at that time kind of I guess a more Eastern medicine philosophy. I'd had enough exposure because in Japan, Chinese medicine is definitely very prevalent and like a
Mm.
big part of culture there. And
Yeah.
my friend Azumi was way, way into it. And I would go hang out at her house and she was into like, using foods as medicine. And so like it's in Japanese, they call that kampo zaku. It's like, or kampo yaku actually. And it was like teaching me like, these are the foods we use to like, support kidney function. And these are the foods we use to like,
Yeah.
promote longevity. And it was really interesting to me. So I was like, okay. And then I told Azumi like what was going on. And she's like, I have a lady you need to see. She's a Chinese herbalist, and I'm going to make the appointment for you and I'll go with
Mm.
you. And I was like, okay. I had no idea what I was doing. I had a little intro to Chinese medicine. That was it. We go to this like herbalist office, and it was like transformational, Abby. Like, I remember sitting down. This woman is like full-fledged Chinese. So she's trained in China, but she's living in Japan. She speaks really good Japanese. Her and I are communicating in Japanese.
I love it.
Sumi is sitting there, but she was asking me all kinds of questions that like were just so mind blowing because like based on my experience to date at the doctor's office, it was so different. Like she was kind of asking me about, different symptoms in the body or systems of the body. She at one point she like took her thumb and she pressed against my shin bone and she said like, "Do you see how there's like this indentation in your lower leg and it's not like going back to like normal, like there was like edema, right?" And
Mhm.
so I was like, "Oh my god, I would have never how did she know that?" It was like she kinda knew it was gonna happen. And then she felt my pulses and she looked at my tongue and I had told her that I had not had my cycle for the longest time. And then I also told her like I'm having all this like loose stool and it's really hard to exercise. And I told her, oh, at the time too, I was a vegetarian for a decade. I had been a
Okay.
vegetarian all the way back to high school. And so I told her the whole story because she wanted to know all of
Yeah.
these like,
Yeah.
details, right? And so she said to me, she's like, "Okay, here's the deal. I'm gonna tell you this straight up. Like, if you stay on the course you're on, this is gonna end very badly. Like, you are gonna be very sick." And she said, "Are you willing to listen to what I have to say?" And I'm like, "Yes, yes, I'm open to it." Because I was scared, and she's
Mhm.
like, I'm gonna like recommend that you start eating some animal meat like immediately. She's like, you don't need to do a ton every day to start, but like little
Mhm.
pieces, little amounts, at least 3 times a week and see how that goes and like work up from there. And I was like, okay. And I thought to myself, well, I guess I don't really have a strong like philosophy to continue to do this. I just did it for the longest time because I thought it was better for you. And because my
Mhm.
best friend in high school was a vegetarian.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then she said, "Yeah, and the other thing is I'm gonna give you some herbs." And this was the crazy part, Abby. So I've never heard anyone outside of Chinese herbalists explain the female reproductive system this way, but she basically said, right now, your reproductive organs are in a state of winter. Everything's froze up. Like your ovaries are frozen, your uterus is frozen.
I
And
love
what
their analogies.
isn't
That's
it
awes
great?
that's such a good analogy. I mean, not a good state to be in, but what a good way to just give you that instant mental picture of,
Yes.
"Oh, yeah, this probably isn't good."
Totally, totally. And like seasons and like cold and hot and heat, right? Like those are really prevalent terms that are used to describe symptoms and states of the body in Chinese medicine. So she's like, I'm going to give you some herbs that are going to go in and they're going to warm those organs up. And like she basically explained it like we've got to thaw things out and then it's going to start to flow, right? So like that was her sort of metaphorical way of saying like we have to unthaw what's like stuck and frozen and get
Mhm.
like the menstrual cycle going again. And
Mhm.
so she gave me two formulas, one for my cycle and one for my digestion. And actually, of the two, the one for my cycle like started working within a month. Like I got my period. I was like, holy crap. And
Wow.
I was like, and I knew it wasn't drugs. And so that was what really got me hooked. I was like, oh my God, I have to know more about this
Yeah.
because
Yeah, that's
this is
amazing.
amazing. And what if other people knew about this? Because back then I
Yeah.
was thinking,
Yeah.
oh, where I'm from in Wisconsin, like we don't use this kind of stuff. Like, wouldn't
Right.
this be
Yeah.
so cool to learn more about this? So
Yeah.
that was kind of what got me on the path, Abby. But needless to say, like that kind of was from that point on, I did have to stay on the Chinese herbal formula for quite a while to I think consistently get my cycle. Like I did notice when I went off of it after I'd been on it for about 6 months, it started to drop off again. And I think honestly, what really regulated me was when I became a nutrition therapy practitioner and I really learned how to eat to support my health.
Mhm.
Leading up to that, too, I was eating a lot more just meat and a better macronutrient balance. But once I had my son, my firstborn, it was like my system started to normalize again. So interestingly, I mean, I think the diet change made a huge, I mean, that was probably the critical thing, but it was kind of like my body once it was like, oh, we know how to like conceive, we know how to grow a baby. Boom, we're
Mhm.
back online. Like
Yeah.
things would just, I really haven't had issues like in terms of some of the female hormonal like symptoms since then. But the gut stuff, on the other hand, that has been the harder of the two. And just kind of that piece in a quick bit here is eventually I came back from Japan, went and had my first colonoscopy. Typical, like, oh, we found nothing abnormal. They did an endoscopy too. You have IBS-D and here's a probiotic for you to take and here's a drug you can take to help slow down your motility. And like,
Mhm.
neither of them were like mind blowing. And the drug I never took. And then I think things kind of got better a little bit after that for a period of time. And then basically like the next several years sort of looked very up and down. And so I know for sure when I was going through a major period of stress after I had my first child and I moved back to Wisconsin, things really fell off with my gut. But since I've kind of been there, and I've become a practitioner and really gone down the rabbit hole, like there were so many things that weren't tested for that were missed. Like, for example, nobody checked to see if I had celiac gene status. I do. I carry both, right? I'm homozygous, probably have it. I don't want to do the formal, like,
Yeah.
eat 2 slices of wheat bread for 6 weeks to get scoped to figure that out. But like,
Yeah.
they never, because I assume that if it would have been tested, Abby, the doctor would have said, well, we did a genetic test and you carry the genotype. So just, preventatively, we recommend you do a wheat free diet. Like I was never guided on anything of the sort. It's just
Wow.
crazy, right? And
Yeah.
you would think back then that this was still like knowledge in conventional
Mhm.
medicine space. Like celiac disease has been around for a very long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just feel like it took kind of me growing my knowledge as a practitioner to start to piece things together. And then later I started to realize that I had, susceptibilities to toxic mold and I'd had, exposure to Lyme disease. And there was this entire like, biotoxin element underneath the surface with the gut stuff. And so, as I was trying to navigate, how do I resolve this once and for all? And it was hitting walls and things were not working that would normally work for, other people or even the
Mhm.
clients I was working with. I was like,
Yeah.
this is why. Like, there's probably been a lot going on, and I think for a very long time, my body was doing the best it could to try to maintain balance,
Yeah.
and then things just kind of hit this tipping point, and it was like, boom, it seemed like almost out of nowhere, all of these gut symptoms were just an everyday occurrence, and then it was like major, major work to try to get things, under control and more functional. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow. And I think so often as practitioners, I mean, this is just my personal belief, but you might think so as well. I think often sometimes we're given those physical challenges so that we can go deeper and further and become better practitioners. Because I honestly think any practitioner that's just really passionate and really just worth their sauce, if you look into their own story, they probably have like a health journey story, something that they struggled with, something that they probably kind of suffered with and were really in the weeds and maybe really stuck on for maybe even a long time in their life. They didn't get the help that they needed. And so they had to go out and literally start learning it themselves so that they could heal. And then it's kind of like that shamanic principle that you ingest the poison and then you alchemize it into medicine and then you share the medicine with your community. That's always really resonated with me because when I look back at some of, and I've shared this in my other podcast episodes, my own story with, hormonal dysregulation and gut issues and, being miserable for so many years of my life. And I think, no, but you know what, that really served me because had I not gone through that, I wouldn't have this personal connection and this passion that drove me to understand like root causes and not be okay with just like the band-aid or just take this medication and you just have to learn to live with it. I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to get to the root. And it's health it's not like getting a diploma where you get it and then you've got it and you just don't have to work at it after that. It's like you get there and you work through these barriers, but you still have to do things to maintain or other things come up. However, we have that passion because we've lived through this, right? Would you say it's kind of the same for you?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, 100%. And I think just as I'm listening to you say that, Abby, I think one of the biggest like pieces of value that you bring to your clients or prospective clients, and same with me too, is just that empathy factor, right? Like, because
Mhm.
not to say you have to live the pain of everyone you work with, but I think all the more so if you have a story, it's not telling the person on the other end of that, like, oh, you're gonna be okay, and it kind of is almost like a little bit diminishing what they're going through. And I mean,
Yeah.
we've probably all been there, certainly in conventional medicine spaces, or just worse than that, where you're actually gaslit by practitioners, right?
Mhm.
But I think it's just like hey, like, I get where you're coming from. I know what that problem feels like. I know what that pain feels like. I've got a roadmap, I'm going to be there every step of the way to help you the best I can. And I'm
Yeah.
going to hold that hope in that space that you can heal,
Yeah.
naturally, right? Like using like foundational supports that help the body come into balance on its own. And half the time, that is a big part of the beginning part of the battle, because when clients come to us, a lot of times they've lost a lot of hope and they feel
Yeah.
pretty defeated because they've
Yeah.
tried things,
Yeah.
and they're starting to question, am I even fixable? Can
Right.
I
And, unfortunately, a lot of times someone will have said, "Oh, well, that's incurable," or "You can't fix that," or "There's nothing you can do," or "You just have to live with it." And
Yeah.
I always, I mean, again, this is my personal opinion, but I always tell people, like, I honestly believe that's not true. That I don't think there's anything that's incurable. I think maybe we just haven't figured out certain cures for things yet. But I honestly think, like, never lose hope, because the body is always working. Your body is so brilliant. It's always working to heal you. Like, there is not
Yes.
a moment of your life that your body is not striving for better health and healing. It's always doing that. So if we're just finding like the right raw materials to give it what it needs, it will do the healing. It will. It's always looking to do that.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And it's interesting. I've kind of dabbled a little bit in this like German new medicine concept where, there that framework to look at the body and symptoms is so fascinating to me because they see all symptoms as adaptive mechanisms that still, even things like cancer, are rooted in like
Yep.
physiological survival. Like
Yep.
like they'll characterize like cervical cancer as like having a strong like association with like women who feel shut down sexually, and it's actually like
Oh,
creating
that makes
more.
so much sense.
Yeah, it's
That
like
I
creating
love.
more surface area for her
Mhm.
to like get impregnated or like
Mhm.
capture it, because if she were to have like sexual intercourse, right? It's a very kind of esoteric concept,
Yeah.
probably first time you're hearing this, but like it does, if you listen to them talk about, it's like, gosh, I could see how that would make sense and how the body wants to preserve, the generational like, lineage, right? And so we
Mhm.
will do the things we do to try to, on some level, keep life force moving along.
Yeah.
And even though, yes, there is this like really serious aspect to cancer, can it kill you? Absolutely. But like the genesis of it, I think there's these other ways we could look at some of these things. And so it's fascinating just to consider that.
Symptoms are survival responses. Gosh, that's wow.
Yeah.
That wow, that's just, I'm just having a whole moment with that. That's so true when you look at it that way, though. And
Yeah.
I love you bringing in that perspective, because I feel like we live in a society, and Western medicine is very much like symptoms are bad. And if you're having symptoms, something is wrong. Now, I'm
Mhm.
not saying that that's incorrect, but I think that also quickly leads to we must suppress the symptoms at all cost,
Yeah.
even if that cost is not actually fixing the root of the problem. And I know so often, and I think especially on the gut healing journey, or at least, from my own experience, sometimes those symptoms have to come to the surface and actually be expressed in order to actually heal. Like sometimes on the gut healing journey, if you're killing off some bad pathogens, there might be some bit of a die-off effect, and it might be a little uncomfortable. And there's things we can do to help mitigate that. But at the same time, it's not just like you're better when all your symptoms are suppressed. No, it's like sometimes you lived your way into it. You kind of have to live your way out of it. You might need to let some of these things come to the surface so they can come out,
Mhm.
rather than just suppressing them. So I love that you brought that up, because it's a little bit of a more holistic shift in perspective, that this isn't suppression, this is looking at why the body's so brilliant. It makes sense that symptoms are just survival responses. And so if we dig deeper into why is it responding that way, and actually support that root cause, rather than just trying to like shove it all under the rug and pretend that it's not happening, which just leads to long-term management but rarely ever resolution.
Oh, for sure. And I think just along those lines, that's why I really believe there's always like an emotional, energetic, intergenerational trauma type of component to most of these chronic health issues. And generally, the more
100%, I
complex.
believe that too.
Yeah. And like the more complex and the more challenging it is from a practitioner standpoint to get that person balanced with diet, good quality foods, lifestyle change, sleep quality improvements, all of that stuff, and root cause testing and addressing those factors, physiological factors. Like if we're only getting like 30%, 40% better, then I'm even more compelled to be like, I think there's a deeper thing at a like energetic emotional level here, and
Mhm.
I might need to help you find some resources to help you explore that, because
Yeah.
that is, I mean, we know the body and the mind are so connected, and we know, again, if this is an adaptive response, it's coming from some stored memory
Mhm.
somewhere in the
Mhm.
DNA, whether it was this lifetime or a previous,
Yeah,
ancestral.
epigenetics. It could be an ancestor
Yes.
of yours that went through a famine or went through a trauma,
Yes.
and that got passed down in your
Yes.
genes. They had an adaptation that they passed down. Again, the body is brilliant. It's always priming us for survival.
Yeah.
It's not priming us to thrive necessarily, but it's priming us for survival. So if you had an ancestor that went through, to use the example of a famine, that famine altered some of their DNA. And so they pass down those alterations to you. And
Yeah.
those are still affecting you, even though you didn't live that in your lifestyle. And that's humans are so amazing. So taking those things into account, if you're on a healing journey and you haven't explored those things and you're still not well, 100% looking into those could be a big missing piece. Absolutely.
Yeah, I totally agree, Abby. And we could like go down such a rabbit hole with that. But yeah, I mean, I just think like sometimes I've really contemplated like, why is it some people get really, really sick within a family and others don't? And
Mhm.
again, not to get deep into like religious or philosophical beliefs around this, but I do sometimes think that certain people kind of predetermine, like, I'm going to take on this plight to be the one
Mhm.
to like resolve this trauma once and for all, like across all generations, all time space. Not to say everyone can do it, but I think in some way, like there is some obviously this we could it's I don't know the mechanism, but I would say that on some level that conscious soul
Yep.
decides like
Yeah.
this is
Yeah, they're like, "It ends here, it ends
it
with
ends
me,
here.
but I'm gonna take this on so that then I
Yes.
can heal and live through it." Oh, yeah, I completely
Exactly.
believe
And
that,
it
yeah.
sucks as a human incarnate to maybe come to that realization and be like, "Well, can I undecide that
I
now?"
know, why did I decide this for myself? What was I thinking? And then I
Yeah.
just have to remind myself, because 'cause I've been there and having those moments where I'm like, "Okay, I chose to heal this generational trauma. It's come
Yeah.
down to me. Why did I decide that?" And then I'm like, "Oh, you know what? I decided that because I knew I was gonna be capable of doing it." Even if it was hard in
Exactly.
the moment, like, I obviously had faith in myself, in my soul, my spirit, that I would be able to, live through that and come out on the other side. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that is exactly it, Abby. And that's the kind of clincher that, like, if you feel you're in a very similar position, you're kind of looking around and it's like, man, I'm really struggling with my health. I've really empowered myself. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. My other family members aren't going through a similar thing. Like, I've sort of thought too, like, we become these people because we have the strength. Like, it's a deeper level of reserve to
Mhm,
be able to hold
mhm.
that space and
Yep,
stay the course with it. And
yep,
even if like you can't whatever succeed at doing it, it's what you're gaining and what you're teaching other people as you try to attempt that
mhm,
process. It's like that whole process of just like embracing it
yeah.
and trying to surmount it. There's so much value in that, right?
Oh, so much. Yeah, and I just keep going back to, I remember there was a time in my life where I was really struggling with my health, and that's when I first heard that shamanic principle of, you ingest a poison and it makes you sick, but along the way, and this is obviously just an analogy, but you ingest the poison, it makes you sick, but you become the person that's able to alchemize it into medicine. And because you alchemized it, now you can go and share your medicine with your community. And I think that's just been kind of like almost like my mission statement and driving factor in becoming a practitioner and like educating women and doing what I do is, I'm like, okay, yes, I took those painful experiences and I alchemized them, and it sounds like you did as well, and now we're sharing them. And
Mhm.
that's yeah, and it's just this deep-seated purpose.
For sure, and the work is never done. That's
It's never done, it's never done.
what
So I love that we were able to mention that, because that is such a big piece, and I don't think it gets talked about enough. I do wanna bring it back a little bit just to, what are some of the common symptoms that people come to you with? For those that are listening that might be dealing with some gut issues and might be wondering, is this something that they might need to go get some help with, and maybe they just don't have to live with it. Maybe it's not normal that I'm getting bloated all the time, or whatever. What are some of those common symptoms that you see people coming in with that can indicate, there might be a problem?
Yeah, for sure, and especially if, the listening audience is more so, focused on and suspecting hormone issues, right? Because sometimes you can think, "Oh, it's a hormone issue," and not even realize there's a big gut component to it. I
Mhm.
always
Yep.
think there is, but, like, I'm
Yeah.
biased, of course, because
Yeah.
that's my area of specialty, but, like, one of the things I commonly find, and this is with a lot of the people I work with, even if they come to me with hormones as a primary concern, is just having trouble staying asleep or early waking times, right? So, sleep quality issues. I mean, some folks have trouble falling asleep as well, but more so when it's like waking up in the middle of the night, waking up multiple times at night, waking up like very early, like 3, 4 a.m.,
I hear
well
that
before.
so often with clients. I hear that so
Yes,
often.
yes. Like way before you should. I mean, some people enjoy waking up super early. I would say 4 is probably a little too early, even for the early bird people, but that type of scenario I see all the time. And, it could be a couple of different things. Obviously, it could be dysregulated blood sugar levels, right? Because we know when blood sugar levels drop, if somebody is in an extended fast, like overnight, we're not taking in food, most of us at least, right? Like, blood sugar drops dramatically. What does the brain do? It'll signal the adrenal glands,
Adrenaline.
yes, to pump out cortisol, which is stimulatory. It's our fight or flight hormone, it's our stress
Mhm.
hormone. But what will happen then, because it does stimulate the body and give it, increased heart rate, wakes us up, right? It'll literally wake a person up and they might
Yep.
not be connecting. That could be a reason why. However, the other side of that is, and this is more where the gut piece comes in, there could actually be some bad gut bugs, parasites, other types of things that are, problematic and low lying undetected infections that have been there for God knows how long that
Mhm.
are having a party at night because especially parasites, right? Like
They're more active at night. Or it kind of
yeah.
blows people's minds sometimes when I'll be like, "Is it more active during the full moon?"
Yes, right, exactly. And so that's something that, I mean, I don't know if you use like journaling or food journaling as part of like your toolbox that you work with clients, Abby, do
Mhm.
you?
Yes.
Yeah, so I do too. And I mean, definitely like logging foods is really important, but sometimes it's even great to like just take a minute and rate your sleep and then look at like, well, where is the moon cycle? Like what else is going on, right? Because you can start to see these patterns. And I would say if you aren't in the habit of keeping some sort of log and it doesn't have to take a lot of time or be detailed, like starting to do that over the course of time is super helpful because you can start to look back and if you're seeing a pattern like that can give you clues. Is it during the full moon cycle? Is it, are you having more restless nights like around the same time? I mean, there's the whole Chinese medicine, organ system tied to the kind of the clock cycle
Oh,
too.
yeah, yeah.
Right. And so we've got liver gallbladder hour, which I believe is like 12 to 2 or 2 to 4. I don't remember. I'd have to check that one, but it is in the middle of the night. And so, again, that could just be from a digestive standpoint. Now, I should caveat that by saying that the idea of the liver gallbladder organ in Chinese medicine, it's more of an energetic concept. It doesn't literally mean the organ. But that being said, a lot of these organs in Chinese medicine, although energetic, also do have a good degree of crossover with the physical organ in the body. So if you literally are having some liver congestion, like on the physical level, meaning your liver's really bogged down, it can't eliminate hormone metabolites, it can't eliminate the toxins you're coming into contact with, like that could very well be part of why you're waking up in the middle of the night too. So
Yeah,
something,
I feel like that's so common, right? The hearing
yeah,
people wake up at like 3 AM, right?
yes,
And that's like
yeah,
right there in the hour of the liver. So, I always kind of think,
yes,
okay, like, is it your liver? Is there some stress on your liver? Does your liver need some support? Is it having difficulty
exactly.
detoxifying?
Exactly. Yeah. So that's a super common thing that would make me really be curious about that. And, I think you use functional testing in your practice, Abby. I definitely do. And so, where I would go with all of these types of symptoms or issues is like, okay, we're going to get some data now to kind of confirm or, refute this hypothesis that there could be a parasite driving this, or let's look at how your liver is detoxifying, right? Like we can actually look at those things and get that data and start to like rule in or rule out different things going on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
perfect. And that leads into my next question, which was be like when a client comes in and is having those type of symptoms, like what are some of the steps that you take to start addressing those?
Yeah. So the sleep dysregulation, I mean, this is where I would be running a hormonal profile that looks at cortisol patterns, like diurnal cortisol patterns. So, as of right now, I run a lot of Dutch tests, which I know you
So
like
do
to
I.
do.
Yep.
Yeah.
Love those.
I've dabbled a little bit in the 24-hour comprehensive urine testing, which will also look at cortisol output and all of the sex hormones. Um, I've done some saliva hormone testing, which is actually really, really great for cortisol too, because you're going to get a pretty sensitive read in saliva when it comes to free cortisol. Now, you can't get the total cortisol production from saliva. It's only going to be the free side of
Mhm.
things. But that's enough to kind of get a sense of, okay, are we seeing it follow the optimal pattern we want to see with cortisol, where like it should be peaking within about 30 to 60 minutes of getting up in the morning and then steadily start to drop off as the day goes on, because
Yeah.
it makes sense, right? We're
Yeah,
expending
it's a
energy.
cycle. And I'm so
Yeah.
glad that you said that because I think often, and I've even seen like, normal labs and blood work come back from the doctor and they'll measure cortisol and it'll just be one value. And
Yes.
I have to explain to people, this doesn't really mean much because
Yeah,
your cortisol is different at different times of the day. Like you were literally just explaining,
totally.
it's
Totally.
supposed to be higher in the morning to give us that energy to get out of bed and get going. And then it's supposed to kind of gently taper off and get lower in the afternoon and go down in the evening so we can fall asleep. And so that's why in this, like the Dutch test or, the other tests you were mentioning, they have you take multiple samples throughout the day and night so you can see if you're at that appropriate amount at those different times of the day. So it's just so much deeper than just where's your cortisol in any given moment. It gives you a graph of like where you track throughout the course of the day and night.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So those are kind of my preferred tests, just to get a read on like what is really going on with cortisol. Are we seeing that high cortisol levels are matching when, you're waking up at night? If it's a Dutch test, I would expect that first, data point to be quite elevated, possibly
Hmm.
even above the high normal range. Well, that absolutely correlates with someone who's waking up at 3 a.m. and unable to get
Hmm.
back to sleep, right?
Yep.
And so that's a big piece of it. The other side of it, just speaking of kind of the liver, detoxification pathways, because we know the liver is our body's main organ of detoxification. We can get different data points on just what's going on with those different phase one, phase two pathways. The Dutch, again, is really excellent for that because we can look at that through estrogen clearance, right? We've got the phase one pathways, and the Dutch will actually map out like, is the body clearing hormones well through that pathway? And then it'll
Hmm.
show us methylation, which is a phase two detoxification pathway. I don't want to like overcomplicate this with all these like phase one, phase two,
Yeah, yeah,
names.
but it's just, I'm always telling people like it's not like you just make hormones and they're just there and that's just that. No,
Yeah.
you're making them, they're doing their job, and then they're getting excreted and metabolized. And the Dutch measures all the steps of that process.
Exactly. Yeah. And then the one pathway that I like to get from the GI map stool test, that's one of the functional stool tests that, practitioners like us can run. That has kind of been the test I've gone back to time and time again, just because of the population I work with. There's some very just awesome markers on there that I can't quite get always as definitively from other functional stool tests. They have their pros and cons, each lab company does. But what I like about the GI map is it does capture beta glucuronidase, which tells us whether or not the phase two glucuronidation pathway is open and working. And so there is a connection between certain pathogenic strains or bad bacterial strains in the gut being overgrowing and then producing this byproduct called beta glucuronidase, which when it's really produced in large amounts, it'll actually get in the way of that glucuronidation pathway, and it's like clogging up that pipe. So it won't allow estrogen to eliminate properly. It won't allow any other toxin or metabolite that the body has to clear to go through that pathway. And so when I have both a Dutch and a GI map side by side, it's like, all
So
right,
valuable.
I
Yeah,
got the
because then
data.
then you
Yeah.
can like you then you can actually see how things play. And say a woman has like estrogen dominance, maybe she has fibroids or cysts or really heavy periods or awful PMS, something like that, lots of mood issues, all that
Yeah.
stereotypical estrogen dominant stuff. And then you look and maybe she's also constipated. Maybe she has high beta glucuronidase. So you can see, oh, okay, I can see there's a buildup happening here because her body should normally be able to metabolize out this estrogen and it's not able to do that. It's building up and in that sense it becomes almost toxic, right? Anything that the body is
Definitely.
done with and needs to get rid of, the waste product, can become toxic. So that's just it's so valuable to have all of that data in front of you where you can really like piece everything together.
Oh, for sure. And it's interesting we're kind of talking about all these data points connecting, because even as of right now, like I've got a few people that are a little bit more on the hormonal symptom end, like that's their main leading complaint. And like I was having a conversation with one the other day and she's like, I think my candida's back. I got candida. I got candida. And I mean, we can certainly measure and see, are there elevated antibodies to candida? It's simple to do with a blood test, but I don't always feel like we have to jump right there, especially if I've
Mhm.
been working with this person for a while and it's like, okay, well, let's do a food journal. Look at what you're eating first, because
Yes.
part of this could
Yes.
be like, let's go back to basics. But I will say this though, there definitely is a connection between, and we do get a candida read on the GI map. Now, it's not going to be super duper sensitive. It's not going to be as sensitive as like blood testing would be, just because for it to show up on a stool test, it means there's got to be quite a bit of it
Yeah.
overgrowing in the body, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, I do catch it quite often. That being said, but then when it does show up, and then especially if I see like beta glucuronidase elevated, I'm starting to think to myself, like, could this person have a toxic metal load going on too? Because we know that
Yes.
candida buffers heavy metals.
Absolutely.
And
There's
then
a
on top,
reason it's present, right? There's a reason
yes,
it's been allowed to overgrow. It's like the lesser
yes,
of the two evils. The body needs to deal with these toxic heavy metals, and it allows things like candida and parasites to actually come in and like eat and
yes.
absorb those.
Yes, absolutely. And then the other interesting piece that kind of can connect back to candida is, especially if it's a woman who's had a long history of, say, like standard American diet eating. Let's say she's been on birth control pill for like a decade or more. That would be another huge red flag.
Mhm.
I would start to wonder about potential toxic copper storage, which is extremely common, especially amongst women who have been on long-term birth control use and then
Mhm.
had a more processed foods diet, let's just call it. And then
Mhm.
especially if they're inhibited detoxifiers, right? And we know that all of these toxic elements and metals make it harder and harder for the body to eliminate, as
Mhm.
do other types of toxins like mold and Lyme. But candida can buffer that too. And so often, I'll start to be very suspicious of like, okay, is part of what's driving your hormonal symptoms, whether that's like just feeling wonky around your cycle or, having headaches or feeling whatever it is, right? Like, is there a heavy metal component to that maybe that we have to look a little deeper at?
And
So,
how many women does that apply to? How many women have been on birth control? Or like in my
yeah,
case, I had a copper IUD after I got off the birth control, and copper toxicity was something I was dealing with, as a
yeah,
copper, I had copper sitting in my cervix for 10 years. So how many women have that where they've standard American diet, and that's not just saying what you're doing right now. What were you doing in your 20s and your teens?
yeah.
So birth control, standard American diet. I mean, that's so many women.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Yeah. And then just some other things that kind of I come across every now and again, maybe a little less frequently than the sleep disturbances, but sometimes women will be like, well, I have like acne, like more acne than I should be having, right? Or especially around my cycle, I get a lot of acne or headaches or PMS symptoms. I mean, any kind of like cyclical symptom that's to me related to like inflammatory or detoxification inhibition. We know that the
Mhm.
skin is a backup detox organ, right? If the liver isn't making adequate bile or high quality bile, especially if somebody's not pooping every single day, at least
Yeah.
once a day, right? Like
Yeah.
I've seen time and time again, it can also manifest as things like eczema and psoriasis too, if there's an
Yep.
autoimmune component. But all of that would really make me wonder about hormone clearance, and is there detoxification clogs happening that have
Right.
a very strong gut component to them? And that's why she's having these cyclical symptoms when the hormones are peaking, and now the body's got
Mhm.
to actually eliminate
Yep.
these things, and it can't, right, Abby?
That makes so much sense, and I like that you brought up the skin, because I remember I'm always telling people, like, your gut is basically like your skin is like if you took your gut and turned it inside out, right?
Yeah.
Would you say that? Because when
Yeah.
you when we have issues happening on our skin, there's no way the gut isn't involved. So if you're
Yeah.
dealing with skin issues like acne or psoriasis or eczema or something like that, you need to look deeper into your gut, because it is not going to be enough just to put on something topical and call it a day, right? And I feel like that's so commonly what people get. They'll go and they'll get like the topical steroid or whatever, and they'll just be managing it and completely missing out on the fact, and because no one told them,
Yeah.
hey, the root of this is probably in your gut. Let's do some investigation about what's off in there, because it's going to be showing up in your skin.
Oh, for sure. And as we're on this topic, I just wanted to go a little bit into just the whole conventional dermatological space of like teenage acne, because this could be such a rabbit hole too. Like,
Yes.
like, and this was something I forgot to say in my own story I experienced. So, like my dad especially dealt with a lot of acne as a kid, a teenager, right? And then even as an adult, he would have like outbreaks on his back. And my mom had it, I think, when she was a teenager to a certain extent too. And I just remember, like, again, being a child of parents that, very much like do the conventional thing, they didn't really know anything about functional medicine. So when we got to that 12, 13, 14-year-old age, we were taken to the dermatologist. Of course, me and my brother struggled with acne. What were we put on, Abby? Tetracycline, minocycline, right? What did that do to the gut, right? I mean, there's
Right.
again kind of that whole component of, if you're listening to this and you've been through that as a teenager and or you've got children that are approaching that age and you're not aware that just taking antibiotics to try to I guess diminish acne through that approach does have gut implications that can be long lasting, sometimes
Long-term
lifelong.
implications.
'Cause you're
Yeah.
you're killing off a lot of beneficial flora, even if it's a lower dose ongoing antibiotic. In my opinion, the better way to go is to either run a functional stool test or take some of the most inflammatory foods out of the diet, or maybe both, right? To try to troubleshoot what is going on that's causing the body to have this inflammation at the level of the skin. But then the other thing I wanted to mention, and this happened when I was in high school, and I think my brothers, we all were put on the drug Accutane. I don't know if you've ever heard of
Oh
that,
my
Abby?
goodness. Yes. Yes.
Yes,
Oh my gosh.
and I think they still use it, and at the time, it was like, "Oh, it's just high dose vitamin A." Well, I didn't realize until I went through and became a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner and did some deeper training on this, that that drug has shown in research to actually destroy cells of the hypothalamus. So, like, there can be irreversible damage to some of these different, pharmaceutical options that are offered for things like
Mhm.
teenage acne,
Yeah.
and they touted it back in the day as like a lifelong solution. You just take it for like, I don't remember if it
Oh
was 60 days, 90 you'll
no.
never have acne again. Well, that's bullshit because I can tell you as an adult, I've certainly had lots of acne. I mean, nothing like as a teen, but it
Yeah.
doesn't like entirely go away. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, this is very resonant with your whole theme of empowerment, but you absolutely have to just do your own research, take everything with a little bit of skepticism. And I think it's all about like, not to say don't go to see your doctor, don't listen to what he or she has to say, but do your research because I think, things I've learned from my own childhood experience growing up is my parents thought they were doing the best they could, right? Like they thought doctors were truly, and I think the
Mhm.
doctors themselves thought they were
Yeah.
probably doing the
Yeah,
best
they're
they
no, they're all well-meaning. I mean, everyone, I think
Yeah.
everyone that works in the healthcare field, in whatever role, I mean, we're here for a reason because we want to help people, so I know that
Yeah.
everyone is very well-intentioned, but I
Yeah.
think I think getting a second opinion is so important or having a team of practitioners. Yeah, go to your general practitioner, but if they're not able to help you solve everything, look up a functional practitioner. Have
Oh,
I
for
have
sure.
some clients that literally I'm one member on their team of multiple healthcare practitioners that all have a certain area of expertise and we're all kind of contributing. And because not one person is ever going to know everything, right?
Well, yeah, that's just it. And I think if you have this little gut instinct, like, okay, I'm being offered a drug as a solution, I feel like maybe this isn't it, or I feel like what if there's some side effects or some issues with this?
Mhm.
Like, listen to that because
Yeah. Yeah.
I have had that thought many times, like, how would my gut health have been different in my 20s if I wouldn't have grown up for most of my teenage years taking tetracycline, minocycline, and then
Yeah.
eventually Accutane, right? We
Yeah.
can't go
Yeah.
back and undo that, but it's a curious thing, right? And
There's
and
no way that it didn't play a role.
exactly. And now as a mom of children, one who's approaching teenagehood, like if acne becomes a thing for him, like I'm just saying straight out, I am not going to do that. Like
Right.
that is not an alignment that
Yeah.
I found
Yeah.
like really gets at the root cause. And so, again, this is how we learn. We learn through going through these experiences and then looking back retrospectively and connecting the dots. But this is another piece where the gut and the hormones become relevant because we can look at a lot of acne issues, teenage or adult, as being treated like they're hormonal issues, but
Mhm.
the mechanism of action is using a drug through the gut, right? Like
Yeah.
using an antibiotic.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, you know what? We need to, as we were mentioning, we need to have a follow-up conversation to this because there's so much more that we have to say on these topics. I think we should
I
absolutely save
know.
this. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes where we continue this conversation. So this has been an amazing conversation, and I've learned some new things that I'm really excited about. Um, how can people find you? How can people work with you?
Yeah, so best way is to go to my website, which is just my first and last name. So it's www.courtneycowie.com. And then when you land on the homepage, there's a little button there that says free gut check call. You can click that and it drops you right into my calendar and you can sign up for a free 15, 20-minute gut check call. So that's the first step if someone's interested in connecting.
And then, so I know we mentioned, people with trouble sleeping or digestion, candida. What are some other, if someone has like IBS or SIBO, or what are some other things that, might be something that you could help with?
Yeah, so anything gut related, and actually now that you're asking this too, Abby, I do have a free resource. It's called my Tame Your Gut e-guide, and it was developed specifically for people struggling with IBS-D, so diarrhea dominant IBS, as well as IBD, because both of those camps of folks have loose stool diarrhea as their main symptom. And that again, you can get by going to my website, and then you'll see the link for free e-guide. But yeah, everything gut. I mean everything from acid reflux all the way down to chronic diarrhea, like north to south. I mean,
Yeah.
I love working with all of it, and typically the folks that are coming to me with gut issues, there's almost always more than one symptom at play too. I definitely know quite a bit about small intestinal bacteria overgrowth, and just kind of understanding how to approach that from a functional standpoint. So a lot of people are really kind of into that as a buzzword right now, or they've done their own
Mhm.
research. Like, I think I might have SIBO. Chances are probable, right? If you have IBS, it's like 70% of the IBS population has that underlying. So but there is kind of an order of operations to how we deal with the gut. So, and this is a very important point. So, I've found time and time again people who try this and try that, and they dabble in these like self treatment solutions will often hit a wall because they either don't know entirely everything going on with their gut that is relevant that they need to address. So they're piecemealing it. Like, I just have candida or I just have SIBO, and they're trying something and then it doesn't work. They're
Mhm.
not getting their diet dialed in
Yeah.
to help
Yeah.
support healing,
Yeah.
or they're just not using the right natural functional supplemental approaches or the right dosing to help support the process
I
too.
love that you said that, because so often I'd have people come in and they'd be like, "Oh, well, I tried that and I tried this," but they never did the right dosing. They never did the
Yes.
right like combination of things, because
Yes.
sometimes we have to combine things for them to be more effective. And so if
Yes.
you've dabbled a little here and you tried something there and you tried something there, that's very piecemeal. That's very different than coming in and actually getting like dialing in your diet, getting a therapeutically dosed protocol that is tailored and specific to you can
Yes.
make just a world of difference.
Right. And then also using high quality, effective products. I mean, that's the other big piece of this too. I mean, there are some great supplement stores out there, but I would still argue like if they don't do third party quality testing, if they
Mhm.
aren't brands that we would generally recognize as high performing, they've got research backing that these products work, like good luck. You may,
Right,
you may or
right.
may
Don't
not
just buy
see,
your things from Walgreens
or
or
Amazon.
Costco. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's very hit or miss. You might find something good, but it's also pretty likely you might be ingesting a bunch of junk. So
Exactly, exactly. And we won't even go into the whole Amazon knockoff brand issue stuff.
we
Like,
won't, but maybe we can talk about that
no,
next time.
I
So
know.
I will be sure to have all the links to your resources, to your website, to the way that they can book in a gut check call with you. I will have those all below in the show notes. And you guys stay, if you liked this conversation, definitely stay tuned, because as you can tell, Courtney and I have a lot of thoughts and a lot of things that we like to talk about and rant about these topics. So definitely stay tuned. And if this podcast was helpful, please like and share it with other women, other people in your lives that may find benefit from it, because that's how we learn, isn't it? We learn something and then we can share that wisdom and knowledge with someone else who might need it. So thank you so much for tuning in today, and we'll see you on the next one.